Hello and welcome to Story Selling for Growth. My name is Tara Christianson and I'm digital strategist here at realestate.com.au. Story selling is really important for marketers to be incorporating into how they're positioning their brand in the online space because it provides the authenticity, the honesty, and the personal voice that underlies much of what's already successful on the web. So incorporating stories and story selling in your content marketing is more important than ever. And what's the foundation of stories? Content. And that's why content is king. That's not a new thing either. Back in the 80s, Bill Gates actually said, content is where I expect much of the real money to be made on the internet, just as it was in broadcasting. Now, he was talking about the television industry at that time, but as we know, times have changed, and it's not just television that's the medium that people are looking every day. In fact, there's 231 million emails sent every minute, 5.9 million Google searches, and 66,000 new photos uploaded on Instagram. That's an incredible amount of content that's being created, captured, copied, and consumed all across the world. The other problem with that, though, is that that's a lot of noise. That's a lot of content for people to have to get through every single day. And so we have to think about how do we cut through some of that and where are people actually starting to look or beginning to look? They started on Google. And they're looking for keywords and platforms that will give them the results that they specifically are looking for. In fact, Google knows that they need to be really relevant in their search, and so they keep changing their algorithms to try to incorporate more of the content that people are looking for. So not just necessarily website links, but perhaps also images and video as well. They're also really trying to bring a result that people are specifically looking for. And people themselves are looking for something that's tailored and individualized to them. If content is king, then context is queen. And what is context? Well, we know that content is basically the foundation that you're laying for the stories that you're telling. But it's where you tell those stories and who's listening to those stories or seeing those stories that's also important. And that's the context, that's the where. We know that Australians spend a lot of time on the internet every single day. And they're not just using one screen or mobile devices, but they're actually using a multitude of devices. Thinking about how our content is delivered is going to be more important than ever. We also really need to think about what they're doing when they're using those screens. And they're researching brands. That's exactly what they're doing. They're researching you. And so that authenticity, that honesty, that personal voice really needs to shine through in your content so that people can see that in the research that they're doing. We also know, though, people change, and that includes your clients. Your buyers' behaviors are going to change. They're not going to all act in the same way, and they're not going to research all in the same way and all in one same place. We also know, especially Generation Z and millennials are starting to look on different platforms, including Instagram and TikTok, and using those for their search and for their news. So are you adapting some of the things that you're doing in your storytelling and your story selling in your content delivery to make sure that you're capturing that audience? For example, if you go onto Instagram and you type in a word, you don't necessarily just get an account that comes up. You'll also get information about hashtags associated with that word, locations associated with that word. There's a number of different elements that all get lumped in together. So you have to be able and ready to be able to capture people wherever they're looking. So if content is king and context is queen, there's one thing that you must keep doing, and that's consistency. Consistency is key. Consistency is important because the buyer journey is long, and we need to not necessarily think about only getting them at one point at the start or in the middle or at the end of a journey, but all the way through that entire journey, and sometimes even past where you think that that journey might end. And that's why having consistent, relevant content that's delivered to them across different channels where they might be looking, where they might be seeing, is more important than ever. Real estate is not a straight journey. It's not this smooth ride all the way across. In fact, it's a lot like riding a roller coaster. There's ups, there's downs, there's twists, there's turns. Sometimes it's even like riding a roller coaster blindfolded, where you don't know what's going to happen next. It can be exhilarating, and sometimes it can be a grind. And recently especially, I don't know if you've been hearing those twin timpanis, those giant drums of gloom and doom that journalists keep putting out there. And the thing is, it's not just the noise that's out there that impacts you, it also impacts on buyers and their behavior and their confidence in what they should be doing and where they should be going next in their journey. But even in tough times, businesses can thrive. In fact, we find those who seize the opportunities in down markets are the ones who end up not just surviving, but thriving. There's a great quote: businesses should be aware of the opportunities that a downturn in the market can provide. There may not be a better time to advertise than this, since many others' tendency is actually to reduce advertised spending. So while others are reducing, either maintain or increase. You'll find that you have a better opportunity than ever. In fact, there's a great graph that shows that companies that maintain their spend all the way through show little to no recovery time needed versus those who may choose to cut by a little or by a lot. Millward Brown database shows that companies who cut advertising efforts by more than half during a downturn can take between 3 to 5 years to get back to their pre-recession levels. Brands have been taking advantage of changing market conditions for a long time. Take Kellogg's. Back in the 1920s, one of their biggest competitors was Post. They were both produced cereal, they both had their brand out there. But during the 1920s, Post actually cut their marketing spend, while Kellogg's continued to increase their marketing spend. Now, Kellogg's exists and Post doesn't. Or in the 1980s, Pizza Hut continued their advertising spend when McDonald's cut theirs. Because of that, Pizza Hut was actually able to gain up to 61% market share during that time. Amazon, during the GFC, not only continued to advertise, but they actually continued to innovate as well, creating new products to really meet people's needs during even a changing or down market. These are brands who are really thriving. And it feeds back to this quote: when times are good, you should advertise, but when times are bad, you must advertise. So what do these three brands have in common? They focused on brand marketing as well as performance marketing. They found the right balance between that short-term performance marketing and the long-term brand building. In fact, branding is more important than ever during down or changing markets. So, how do we find that success? We don't just focus on that lead generation, on that rational messaging. Sometimes that works with short-term leads, and sometimes you may find that it's not working as well as it used to. That's where branding comes in, because branding is that consistency that's provided to buyers and prospective buyers all the way through, from even before the beginning of their real estate journey, all the way through and past their real estate journey. And emotional marketing is important because real estate is emotional to many, many people. It's the largest asset they may have, whether they're first-time home buyers or whether they're investors. So really making sure that you're tapping into some of that emotion is going to be very important. So what does that balance look like? Well, you've got your performance marketing, that short-term stuff. You're thinking bottom of the funnel, you're positioning your product. You may have provided some rational arguments and sales offers. You might be thinking, oh, this is building awareness and interest, and it is, but you also need to integrate that brand marketing for that long-term effect. You're thinking about capturing people at the top of the funnel. You're thinking about positioning your brand across a number of different platforms that are there, appealing to some of that emotion, making sure that your reputation and your brand equity stays strong, and reaching a large audience while you're doing it. Having a balance of both is really the key in your marketing strategy. So we know that there's a lot of noise out there. How do you rise above it? Stories. For 40,000 years, humans have been telling stories to cut through. In fact, if you don't give the market a story to talk about, they'll define your brand story for you. So think about what your brand story is. or maybe it's a series of stories. And the thing is, it's not just about positioning your product front and center every single time in those stories. Think about some of the most impactful people that are out there, the most impactful brands that are out there. Nike, Apple, British Airways. Nike doesn't sell their shoes directly in every single commercial. Apple doesn't position their products front and center in every single ad that they do. British Airways focuses on what's the end result? Why do people take trips in the first place? What's the end result of the journey? What's the feeling that you're trying to capture there? They're not focused on how fast does your luggage arrive, or do you get the middle seat or the aisle or the window? They're focused on what's the end result. And that's the emotion that they're tapping into for their customers. And because of that, they're tapping into and creating relationships with those clients and their customers, and they're creating trust with those clients and their customers. So how do you tap into that power? Through stories, and more specifically, story selling. That's where you're going to strategically create and share relevant brand stories that drive people to act. And when you do that, people will not only get to know you, but to like you and to trust you. That's something we see here at realestate.com.au. Some of our highest performing content, our highest quality content, is from stories on property news and insights, or getting the edge. And story selling works. According to a study by Nielsen and Mode Media, consumers spend 2.5 minutes reading a sponsored article. That's roughly the same amount of time that they spend reading a standard editorial piece. And it's something we see on our site at realestate.com.au, that the stories that are relevant to the property journey and high quality content are the kinds of content that perform the best. And branded content, we know, is highly effective, not just at one point of a funnel, but across the entire funnel. And it increases both brand favorability and purchase consideration. The best news is you don't have to do it alone. And in fact, you shouldn't. Consumers are actually more receptive to brand messaging if the content is published by a trusted voice. Taking advantage of those trusted voices, those partnerships, those relationships is important because they know who the audience already is, and they know what that audience wants. And they're able to deliver and help you along the way. You don't have to ride that roller coaster with a blindfold on anymore. You know what's coming next. So, how do you successfully story sell? The first tip is to be authentic and consistent. Authenticity is important because buyers can tell when you're not being authentic. Consistency is important so that you can continue to nurture buyers along their entire journey. Secondly, address the elephant in the room. Sometimes we hear those twin drums of doom and gloom from journalists. Sometimes there's market challenges. Buyers need to be reassured along the way, and they want to know what you're doing to overcome some of those conditions. Third, reevaluate your target market needs. Marketers typically segment according to demographics, first home buyers or downsizers. But in down or changing markets, such segmentations may be less relevant than psychological segmentations. Different kinds of ways of approaching who or what your market is and where they might be in that online space. Number 4, create value-based stories. Value-based stories means it follows your values, your brand's mission statement. And then you're using stories to inform, to educate, and to inspire your buyers along the way. Number 5, a trusted voice adds relevance and credibility. Your partnerships are more important than ever. Working with trusted voices like realestate.com.au can really help you get a head start on who your audience is and where they are and the kinds of stories that they're looking to hear. Number 6, sell the dream. People remember stories, not facts. Facts and figures are actually 22 times more likely to be remembered when they're wrapped up in stories. And it's not just an emotional thing, it's actually a chemical thing in our brains. When we hear facts and figures wrapped in stories, it's actually attached to emotions. And so we're much more likely to have a created bond within us. It's science. Finally, never stop marketing. When you stop marketing, you cease to exist in a buyer's eyes. Now is the time to really seize the opportunity to build your brand to be the buyer's choice, and to use story selling along the way. Thank you so much for your time today.